I'm doing a video series on leadings from the Lord, and today I want to deal with the subject of fleeces. I mentioned it in the last session about the dangers, and I want to talk to you today about Gideon's fleece and give you some information surrounding the entire story of Gideon and why he did lay out that fleece. The very first thing to take note of, and this is, you can find all this in the book of Judges chapter 6, but the very first thing that took place is Israel had become very oppressed, really was overwhelmed by the Midianites and the Amalekites, and they were terrorizing the nation. And finally, the children of Israel, it says, they cried out to the Lord. You know, the Bible says you have not because you ask not. And so the first thing that initiated the surrounding events of Gideon was the fact that the nation Israel itself, the people of God, or today we could say the church, would cry out to God or would ask God for help. So when they did that, immediately the next thing that took place is God sent a prophet. And the prophet came into the land and reminded them of all the great miracles and the signs and the wonders that God had done for them in leading them out of Israel or out of Egyptian bondage and all the supernatural things. Just reminded them. And then he said, "Fear not, I'll deliver you again." And so he's given them that word of confidence. But then he also says to them, "But you will have to obey my voice." That's so very important, folks. Even under the old covenant, these people had to obey the voice of God. The next thing you know is, or the next thing we see is Gideon. And that we're told that he is hard at work running a harvest behind the wine press. And he's doing it secretly because he knows that if the Midianites see him doing this, they'll come in, steal what he's got, his harvest, his crop, and he will maybe even be put to death by them. They hated them. And so Gideon is still taking one step in faith, doing something. You know, as a Christian, you've got to learn to do something. You want to turn the world upside down, you've got to do at least something, make some effort. And we'll see here that Gideon was not very strong in the things of God. He believed in God. And when God appears to him in angelic form, the angel says unto him, "Hail, Gideon, God is with you, O mighty man of valor." He was just recognizing the fact that Gideon was at least willing to harvest his crop. Even in dangerous times, he was willing to do something. And so he calls him a mighty man of valor. And so Gideon's response is two questions. If you're with us, how come, if God's with us, how come we're going through this trial? How come we're suffering the way we're suffering? And where be our miracles? Two questions that he asked. What has happened? Well, I've heard the prophet that has come in here talking about the miraculous realm of God and everything he has done. But where are our miracles? And here Israel and Gideon has not experienced, his whole lifetime, he's not seen the power of God working. I think that's where the church is here today. And Gideon looks at this situation and questions him. Now here's the problem with Gideon. He and the prophet does not tell him why. He doesn't tell him why the oppression and doesn't tell him why there's no miracles. But we know, in hindsight, we know. Gideon did not know. The problem was they didn't pay attention to the word of God. Deuteronomy chapter 28 clearly said, listen carefully, verse 1 said, "If you will hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all that he commands you, then all these blessings will come on you and overtake you." And he talks about these supernatural things that God would do. But then in verse 15, he goes on to say, "But if you will not hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all that he commands you to do, then all these curses will come on you." And the curses were 3 times as many as the blessings. And the curses included being oppressed of their adversaries and enemies, and also no signs, no wonders, no miracles, no help from God, no supernatural sustenance, because they did not hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord. Now I want to take this as part 1 because I don't want these videos to be too long, but I want to pick this up in the next session. But I want you to understand, here was a man that God chose. It wasn't the best of all men, didn't pay much attention to the word. And like many Christians today are wondering, why God? Why God? Where's your power? Where's your miracles? And really the blame is on us. We haven't hearkened diligently unto the voice of the Lord. The prophet had come into the land after they cried out for help, and the first thing he had to do was remind them of the greatness of God, the ability of God. But then secondly, he said, "I'll deliver you, but you have to obey the voice." You have to obey the voice of God. Listen to the voice of God, the still small voice. Maybe it'll even lead you to a place of maturity where you can hear God directly. I'll continue this in the next session.